I felt the morning sun warm my skin as it streamed through my window, turning everything golden and soft. My bridesmaids flitted around me, laughter and little squeals of excitement filling the air like a melody, the scent of fresh flowers mixed with hairspray and perfume, wrapping around me in a sweet, comforting hug. I caught my reflection in the mirror, the woman I'd always dreamed of being, radiant, in love, ready to step into a forever I'd believed in so completely. Quietly, I whispered to myself, "This is it. This is my day." That simple truth anchored me, holding me steady in a moment that felt almost sacred. Outside, I could almost see the guests gathering at the reception hall, the chandeliers glittering and soft music drifting in the background. I imagined how Daniel would look at me when I finally walked down that aisle, the smile in his eyes, the promise of forever etched on his face. My mom was there with gentle hands, adjusting my hair and smoothing every last detail as if she could keep any worries at bay. My dad, ever the stoic one, was already dabbing his eyes with his handkerchief, his love loud in the quiet way he looked at me. It was a perfect moment, one I wanted to soak in and hold close, to remember when I needed a little light. I closed my eyes for just a second, breathing in the gentle chaos around me. The laughter, the music, the hope that tasted sweet on my tongue. I thought of the dreams I'd carried since I was a little girl. The dress, the first dance, the forever after. My heart felt too big for my chest, almost bursting with joy. I didn't see the fleeting looks between my sister and Daniel, or the tension hiding behind their polite smiles. I didn't know. For me, this day was everything I'd ever wanted. A perfect promise, a perfect beginning. Little did I know that even the brightest days can hold shadows. As I stepped into my dress, I felt the weight of silk and lace hug my body like a second skin, a gentle armor for a day I'd waited so long to live. My bridesmaids fussed over every detail, their laughter echoing around me, but my mind was fixed on Daniel, the way he'd whispered forever into my ear, the way his touch had always felt like home. I tried to picture his face as he saw me for the first time in that dress, the surprise, the pride, the love I thought we'd built together. My cheeks flushed with anticipation, my hands trembling just a little as I adjusted the veil. Everything felt so right, so perfectly in place, like the world had paused just for me. My mom reached out, her eyes brimming with tears, her fingers brushing a stray curl from my face. "You're beautiful," she said softly, and I could feel her pride like a warm blanket around my shoulders. She'd always been my anchor, the one who reminded me to believe in love even when the world felt uncertain. I took her hand and squeezed it, letting her steadiness calm the butterflies in my stomach. My dad, standing in the doorway, gave me that small, shy smile he saved for moments when words weren't enough. In that moment, I felt so loved, so safe, as if nothing could shake the happiness that bubbled up inside me. I took a deep breath and looked around, at the flowers that smelled like fresh beginnings and the laughter that sparkled like champagne bubbles in the air. This was the day I'd been dreaming of, every detail carved out in my mind for months, every step practiced in my head until I could walk it blindfolded. I wanted to remember every heartbeat, every smile, every promise whispered in the soft glow of this perfect morning. I wanted to remember the hope that danced in my chest, the way it made me feel alive and unbreakable. I didn't know, not yet, that everything I'd built was about to crack. I didn't know that, as I took one last look in the mirror, I was also saying goodbye to the person I thought I was. As the car pulled up to the reception hall, my breath caught in my throat. The doors loomed tall and welcoming, the soft music drifting out like a promise. I stepped out carefully, feeling the slight tremble in my knees, the swirl of nerves and joy that made my heart race. My father offered me his arm, steady and reassuring, and I clung to him like I was 8 years old again, needing his strength to carry me through. My bridesmaids gathered behind me, each of them beaming, ready to walk with me through those grand doors. For a moment, I let myself believe in the magic of it all. The flowers, the music, the way everything seemed to glow. I could feel my pulse quicken as I stepped forward, the weight of the dress, the veil brushing against my shoulders like a gentle whisper. My mother's tears sparkled like pearls in the soft light, and I felt my own eyes prickling, but I blinked them back. I wanted to see it all clearly, to drink in every moment of this day I thought would be the happiest of my life. My father squeezed my hand one last time, and with that small gesture, I felt every dream I'd ever had come to life. I didn't notice the hush that fell over the crowd as I approached the grand doors, didn't see the small signs of something wrong. My heart was too full to see the cracks. As the doors opened, the music swelled, and I took my first step inside. My heart leaped in my chest, caught between the thrill of the moment and something I couldn't quite name. I told myself to hold on to this feeling, the hope, the love, the sense that I was exactly where I was meant to be. I didn't know that on the other side of that threshold, my world would shift in ways I couldn't imagine. I didn't know that the smile on my lips would soon be frozen in shock. But I took that step anyway, not knowing, because that's what love had always meant to me, and in that heartbeat, everything changed. The moment I stepped into the hall, a hush fell over the room. I could feel every eye turn to me, the weight of their stares heavy on my shoulders. For a split second, I thought it was because I looked beautiful, that they were stunned by the sight of me in my dress, ready to begin the rest of my life. But then I saw her. My sister, Lily, standing at the altar in a white wedding dress. My wedding dress. My breath caught in my throat, the world tilting beneath my feet as if the ground itself had betrayed me. I couldn't move. My feet felt glued to the polished floor, my hands clenched at my sides, the bouquet trembling in my grasp. The air around me seemed to crackle with disbelief, the guests gasping, their confusion filling the room like a rising tide. Lily turned to me, her lips curling into a smile that made my skin crawl. "Did you really think he wanted to marry you?" she said, her voice slicing through the air like a blade. In that single moment, the fairy tale I'd believed in vanished, replaced by a cold, hollow ache. Daniel stood there beside her, his face a mask of calm satisfaction that made me want to scream. No apology, no regret, just that smug glint in his eyes that told me everything I needed to know. My heart pounded in my chest, each beat echoing with the sound of betrayal. I felt like a ghost in my own story, watching the world I'd built crumble in slow motion. And as the guests murmured and shifted in their seats, I realized the truth was even worse than I'd imagined. This wasn't just a betrayal. It was a deliberate, calculated humiliation. I felt my chest tighten as the whispers and gasps swelled around me. Every face I saw seemed to blur, their confusion a mirror of the chaos tearing through me. My fingers gripped the bouquet so tightly the stems dug into my palms, a small, sharp pain that grounded me in the nightmare I couldn't wake from. I tried to speak, to ask how this could be real, but the words tangled in my throat. My mouth was dry, my voice nothing but a ragged breath, swallowed up by the weight of the scene in front of me. All I could do was stare, my mind reeling with questions that had no answers. Lily's smile widened, cold and triumphant, as if she were feeding off the shock in the room. She looked so calm in my dress, every detail perfect, as if she'd been planning this moment for years. I wanted to scream, to tear the dress from her body, to demand she give me back the life she'd stolen. But my feet stayed frozen, my heart breaking with every second that passed. Daniel reached for her hand, his touch tender in a way that used to be reserved just for me. I felt the world collapse around me, the weight of every dream I'd had turn to ash. In that moment, it was as if time slowed down. The music that had once felt so romantic now sounded hollow, echoing off the walls of a lie I hadn't seen coming. My parents looked at me with horror and heartbreak, their confusion as raw as mine. My mother's tears fell unchecked, her hand reaching for me but stopping halfway, as if she didn't know how to help. My father's face was pale, his jaw set tight, his eyes filled with a fury I'd never seen before. And I stood there, the bride who wasn't, caught in a scene that was supposed to be the happiest of my life, now a twisted nightmare. My breath hitched, but I swallowed the sob that threatened to spill. I could feel my body trembling, my pulse a wild drumbeat in my ears as I tried to make sense of what was happening. My mind raced, memories of every promise Daniel had made to me crashing down like glass. The first time he said, "I love you," the way he'd held me close and whispered about forever. All of it felt like a cruel joke now. My vision blurred with hot tears, but I refused to let them fall. I refused to give them the satisfaction of seeing me break. I clung to that last shred of dignity, even as my world turned to dust. Every glance, every whisper from the guests felt like 1,000 tiny cuts against my skin. I saw the pity in their eyes, the confusion, the awkward discomfort as they realized the truth unfolding before them. I wanted to run, to hide from the humiliation that threatened to swallow me whole. But I stood there, rooted in place by the weight of everything I'd lost. My sister's betrayal burned like acid in my veins, her smile a cruel echo of the love she'd stolen. And Daniel? He didn't even flinch. He just watched me with that same smug satisfaction, as if he'd finally won some game I hadn't even known we were playing. I swallowed hard, feeling something cold and sharp settle in my chest, a glimmer of anger beneath the heartbreak. I wouldn't let them see me as a victim, wouldn't let them define the story of this day. Even as my dreams lay in ruin, I knew one thing for certain. I would not let this moment break me. I would stand tall, even if it felt like the hardest thing I'd ever done. And with that, I took a breath, ready to face the next chapter of my life, no matter how much it hurt. Because if they thought this was the end of me, they were wrong. I felt the words rising in my throat, sharp and desperate, but they came out shaky and broken. "How could you do this to me?" I asked, my voice trembling with the weight of my heartbreak and anger. My hands were clenched so tight I could feel my nails biting into my palms, the pain a small anchor in the chaos. Lily didn't flinch. Her cold smile never wavered, her eyes glittering with something dark and smug. She looked at me like I was the fool, the one who'd been too blind to see what was right in front of me all along. The betrayal cut deeper with every second, but I refused to look away. Daniel shifted slightly, his expression as calm and satisfied as it had been when I walked in. He didn't even bother to look ashamed. "We've been together for months," he said, his voice low and almost bored, as if he were telling me something that no longer mattered. My heart clenched, the words echoing in my head, each one a fresh cut across the raw wound of my trust. The guests around us were silent, their eyes wide and horrified, but I didn't care about them anymore. This was between us, me and them, the two people I'd trusted most. I wanted to know everything, even if it shattered me. I swallowed hard, fighting to keep my voice steady. "So this was all a game to you? Everything you said, every promise you made, was it all a lie?" My voice cracked on the last word, but I didn't back down. I wanted them to hear the pain in every syllable, to feel the weight of what they'd done. Lily just tilted her head, her smile almost gentle, as if she were explaining something to a child. "You were always too naive, Emma," she said softly. "You believed in fairy tales, but I live in the real world." And with that, I felt something inside me harden, a spark of defiance that refused to die. I felt the weight of every pair of eyes in that room, but I didn't let them see me falter. My chest heaved as I fought to steady my breath, my pulse thundering in my ears. I could taste the bitterness on my tongue, the betrayal, the humiliation, the anger that simmered beneath it all. My sister's words rang in my head, twisting the knife deeper with every breath I took. I had always trusted her, believed her love for me was unbreakable. And yet here she was, tearing my world apart without a shred of remorse. My gaze shifted to Daniel, and I searched his face for any flicker of regret, any sign that he understood the gravity of what he'd done. But there was nothing, just that same smug satisfaction, like he was proud of this twisted reveal. My voice dropped to a whisper, cold and raw. "I gave you everything," I said. "My heart, my trust, my future. And this is how you repay me?" My words cracked the air like a whip, but he didn't flinch. Instead, he just tightened his hold on Lily's hand, sealing their betrayal with every heartbeat. I realized then that the people who stood with me in this room were either too complicit or too blind to have stopped this. The friends I'd laughed with, the family who had watched me grow up, they were all just as stunned, just as caught off guard. And yet, in that moment, I knew I couldn't lean on them to make this right. It was up to me to decide how this story would end. My voice grew stronger, my tears drying on my cheeks. "You think you've broken me," I said, my words clear and deliberate. "But you haven't, and I won't let you define me." I took a deep breath, feeling the tremor in my chest settle into something steadier. My hands were still shaking, but I forced them to loosen, the bouquet dropping to the floor with a soft thud. The flowers scattered across the polished floor, a quiet rebellion against the nightmare that had unfolded around me. I looked at Lily, really looked at her, the sister I'd shared secrets with, the one who'd promised to always be on my side. The woman in front of me felt like a stranger, her smile as cold and unfamiliar as a winter wind. And yet, even in the heartbreak, I felt something else flicker to life inside me. I knew then that I wouldn't let this moment define the rest of my life. I wouldn't be the girl who stood there, frozen and broken, while they reveled in their betrayal. My voice was low but unshakable as I said, "This ends here. You've taken enough from me, but you won't take my spirit." The silence that followed was electric, the guests holding their breath as if they'd been waiting for me to find my strength. My father's eyes met mine, a silent promise of support I didn't need to hear out loud. And in that small moment, I felt the tiniest spark of hope. As I turned and walked away from them, the weight of their betrayal still heavy on my shoulders, I knew there would be more pain ahead, but I also knew I wouldn't let them see me break. My steps felt slow and deliberate, each one a small reclaiming of my power. I didn't know what would come next, how I'd rebuild, how I'd heal, but I refused to let this be the end of my story. I refused to let their lies be the last thing I remembered about this day. And in the quiet space that followed, I promised myself I would find my way forward. I stepped out into the cool night air, the sudden quiet wrapping around me like a balm. The laughter and music of the reception hall were still echoing in my head, but out here, it felt like I could finally breathe. I tilted my head back, letting the soft glow of the streetlights warm my face, and for the first time in hours, I let my shoulders drop. My dress felt heavy against my skin, but I didn't care. It was no longer a symbol of love or promise. It was just a dress, and I was no longer the woman who had walked down the aisle in it. I was someone else now, someone I wasn't sure I recognized yet. But I knew one thing: I wouldn't let them break me. I pulled out my phone and scrolled through the messages I'd ignored all night. Friends asking if I was okay, family trying to piece together what had happened. I didn't have the energy to explain, not yet. So I sent a single message to the one person I trusted completely, the one friend who'd always known how to find me when I felt lost. "Can you come get me?" I typed, my fingers shaking but my heart steady. I didn't need the noise or the sympathy of strangers. I needed someone who would let me feel it all, someone who would sit with me in the darkness without trying to fix it. Minutes later, headlights swept across the pavement, and I felt a flicker of relief in my chest. My friend pulled up and got out of the car without a word, her eyes soft and understanding. She opened the passenger door and just held me, the warmth of her embrace breaking through the chill that had settled in my bones. I didn't say anything. I didn't have to. She knew. And in that silent understanding, I felt something shift. This wasn't the end of my story. It was the start of something I hadn't dared to dream of yet. Back at my friend's apartment, I sank onto the couch and let out a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding all night. The room was warm and smelled faintly of coffee and candles, a comfort I hadn't known I'd needed. My friend didn't push me to talk. She just made me a cup of tea and set it in front of me, her quiet presence a balm for the raw ache in my chest. I wrapped my hands around the mug, feeling the warmth seep into my fingers as my thoughts finally began to slow. It was strange, how a moment of kindness could feel like a lifeline in the middle of a storm. I stared down at the tea, watching the steam curl up into the quiet air. My mind kept replaying everything: Lily's cold smile, Daniel's indifference, the shocked faces of my friends and family. But with every breath I took, I felt the edges of that pain start to dull, replaced by something steadier. I didn't have all the answers, and I didn't know what came next. But I knew I was done letting them control the narrative of my life. I was done being the woman who didn't see the cracks until they swallowed her whole. I took a sip of the tea, feeling it settle warm and steady in my chest. That night, I sat down at the small desk in the corner of the room and pulled out a piece of paper. My heart was still bruised, my fingers still shaking, but I needed to put my thoughts somewhere that was just mine. I wrote to Daniel and Lily, pouring out every ounce of my hurt and anger. But more than that, I wrote about my refusal to let them define me, about how I'd rebuild, piece by piece, until I was stronger than they'd ever imagined. As the pen scratched across the paper, I felt something shift inside me, a quiet promise to myself that I wasn't done yet. I was just beginning. When I finally folded the letter and set it aside, I felt lighter, as if I'd left a piece of the pain on that paper. My friend sat across from me, her quiet support a gentle reminder that I didn't have to face this alone. I didn't need answers right away. I didn't need to know exactly how I'd heal or who I'd be on the other side of this. All I needed was to trust that I would find my way back to myself. And in that small, quiet space, I let myself believe that I could. I closed my eyes and thought about the girl I'd been that morning, full of hope and dreams, certain that nothing could touch the love I'd built. That girl was gone now, but in her place stood someone stronger, someone who had faced the truth and survived. I wasn't sure what the next chapter of my life would look like, but I knew I wouldn't let it be written by their betrayal. My heart still ached, but it beat with a new kind of determination, a soft, fierce promise to myself. As the night stretched on, I felt the pieces of my heart begin to fit back together, different but whole in their own way. I knew there would be days when the hurt would feel fresh again, when the memory of that day would cut through the calm I was trying to build. But I also knew that those days would pass, and I would keep moving forward. I took a deep breath and looked out the window, the city lights shimmering in the distance like small beacons of hope. This wasn't the end. It was the start of something new. The weeks that followed were filled with quiet healing and small steps forward. I started going to therapy, pouring out the tangled mess of my feelings in the safety of that soft, quiet room. At first, it felt like opening a wound that had barely begun to scab over, raw, painful, impossible to look at. But slowly, word by word, I began to see the shape of my own strength beneath the scars. My therapist reminded me that healing isn't about forgetting, but about learning how to carry the memories without letting them weigh me down. And in that simple truth, I found a glimmer of peace. I spent more time with the people who had always seen me, even when I didn't see myself. Friends who showed up with coffee and laughter, who didn't flinch at the raw edges of my heart. Family who wrapped me in hugs that said everything words couldn't. I let them in, piece by piece, trusting that I didn't have to be whole to be worthy of love. I started writing again, not letters to the past, but small journal entries about the future I was beginning to imagine. Little glimpses of the woman I was becoming. And for the first time in a long time, I felt hope rise up like a sunrise in my chest. I took long walks in the early morning light, breathing in the scent of fresh grass and the quiet hush of a world waking up. I let myself dream again, not of weddings or perfect promises, but of a life that felt like mine alone. Each step forward felt like a tiny victory, a promise to the girl who had walked down that aisle that she wouldn't be forgotten. I didn't know if I would ever trust the way I once had, but I knew I would trust myself. And in that quiet certainty, I felt something I hadn't felt in months. I felt free. I spent hours rediscovering the small things that made me feel alive, the scent of fresh coffee in the morning, the warmth of sun on my skin as I sat by the window with a book. I let myself feel the sweetness of these simple joys, holding on to them like tiny lifelines. Every moment of peace was a quiet victory, a sign that I was learning to live without the weight of their betrayal. I didn't need grand gestures or sweeping declarations. I just needed the quiet certainty that I was enough, always had been, always would be. I found myself laughing more often, even when the memories of that day tried to pull me back under. I realized that healing wasn't a straight line, that some days the hurt would still feel fresh and sharp. But on those days, I reminded myself that I wasn't alone. My friends and family stood beside me, their love like a lighthouse guiding me through the darkest nights. And in their laughter, in their warmth, I found the strength to keep going, even when it felt impossible. One afternoon, scrolling mindlessly through my phone, I stumbled across a picture of Daniel and Lily. Their forced smiles and posed happiness did nothing to hide the cracks that ran beneath the surface. For a moment, I felt a pang of old hurt, but it didn't sting the way it once did. I set my phone down and let the quiet settle around me like a soft blanket. I wasn't her anymore, the woman who would have let their lies define her. I was someone stronger now, someone who had learned to stand on her own 2 feet. And in that moment, I felt a calm certainty that I was exactly where I was meant to be. The last pieces of my old life still echoed in the corners of my mind, but they didn't hold me captive anymore. I had learned to let them be memories, shadows of what once was, but no longer the whole story. I spent more time in the quiet moments of my own company, learning to cherish the sound of my own breath, the steady beat of my heart. It was in those soft spaces that I found the truest parts of myself, the parts that had been buried under the weight of someone else's lies. And slowly, I began to trust those pieces again. I no longer measured my worth by the promises of others. I no longer needed anyone to tell me I was enough. The journey hadn't been easy. There were still days when I woke up with tears on my cheeks, dreams of that day haunting the edges of my sleep. But even in those moments, I reminded myself that I was still standing, that every breath, every laugh, every small joy was a testament to the resilience of my own heart. And in that quiet strength, I found a kind of peace I'd never known before. I knew the path ahead wouldn't always be easy, but I wasn't afraid of the unknown anymore. I was no longer defined by the heartbreak that had once broken me. Instead, I carried it as a part of my story, a reminder of how far I'd come and how much further I was ready to go. I stood at the window and watched the light stretch across the sky, feeling the warmth of a new day on my skin. And in that moment, I whispered to myself a promise I knew I could keep. I am enough, just as I am. And this is only the beginning.